Hello and welcome to Star USA Training. Today is Tuesday, October 10th, and we'll be talking about the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, also known as CTPAT Security, CTPAT Supply Chain Security, or CTPAT SCS. We are recording this webinar. The slides and the recording and all materials will be made available after the broadcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, the link to those materials will be in the description below. All participants will be muted, but the Q&A feature is available if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer those throughout the session as well as at the end. CTPAT is one of those topics where there is a lot of nuance depending on your business type, so feel free to throw questions at me and we'll get those answered. There is also one NCBFAA credit available for CES and CCS participants. That code will be provided at the end of the webinar, as well as in the email that we send out with the recording. By way of introduction, my name is Mike Easton. I am the president and general manager of Star USA Inc. I'm a licensed customs broker, and I will have 20 years of experience under my belt come next April. So I've been around for a little bit. Star USA is a business that provides trade and compliance, consulting advice, training, and services in all areas of international business and international trade regulations. We do in and outsourced operations, policies and procedures, audit and disclosure, as well as a smattering of different programs administered by various U.S. government agencies. We do CTPAT and have done CTPAT since 2003, I believe we started doing it. I've traveled to, I think, 4 different continents, 10 or so different countries for CTPAT validations. We've been around the block. We've seen just about all there is to see in the CTPAT environment. So we are well suited to kind of talk through this and help you understand what the CTPAT framework really looks like. So again, please feel free to pepper us with questions. I like questions. It really helps me dig into the stuff that matters to you as the audience. And without further ado, we shall jump into the CTPAT Security Program Framework, starting with some of the background and importance of supply chain security, how this came about, talk through what mutual recognition means in the relationship to CTPAT, and it covers some of the minimum security criteria. The application of these things to your business, again, is going to be unique. I'm hitting it from a general angle, but I am more than happy to hit it from a very specific angle if you want to throw some questions at me. But in the meantime, first, we really have to understand the importance of supply chain security to a country like the United States. Last year, our exports and goods and services increased by 17.7%, almost 18% to $3 trillion. Meanwhile, our imported goods increased by almost 20% to 3.35 trillion, which is exceeding the pre-pandemic numbers that were about $3.2 trillion. And that's not services, that's just straight up goods. So we have more than $3.35 trillion in goods coming into the US in 2022. We're expecting similar and higher numbers for 2023. Last year, there were more than 33.4 million cargo containers coming into US ports. That's a staggering number, really. And that's not counting air. I don't think it counts highway or rail either. These are just cargo containers coming into the US ports. And when you look at a number like 33.4 million containers, you start to understand how impossible a task it is for an agency like CBP to provide adequate security coverage to that scope of volume. It's just too much. And it's partly why they created the CTPAT program. And today, more than 10,900 CTPAT members are participating in CTPAT. So these are US companies or foreign manufacturers in Canada and Mexico that participate directly in CTPAT, representing more than half of all inbound cargo to the US. You can get more stats and more figures from the CBP Trade and Travel fiscal reports that they publish annually, as well as the Bureau of Census's annual trade highlight report. But these are significant numbers. And when we talk about the role that supply chain security plays in international commerce, we have to understand how we got to where we are and where we're heading. We've seen a lot of motion over the last couple of years, and we expect to see more down the pipe globally in this direction of security. After the terrorist attacks of 9/11, 2001, there was a massive sea change in the focus of agencies like Customs and Border Protection, shifting from things like revenue collection and support for the trade community into supply chain security. They realized how vulnerable our borders were following that attack, and they took it upon themselves to create new programs to enlist the support of the trade community themselves in order to bring more security to our cargo coming in and reduce the effective risk profile of the cargo vector. To that end, they created the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. And that partnership piece of that is a strong element of the equation. They started this in November 2001 with their pilot program participants. It took full effect a couple years later, 0304. But effectively, Customs was responsible for enforcing more than 49 agency regulations at the border. They still are, but they shifted their focus from that revenue collection angle to a security angle. Recognizing that they couldn't sufficiently protect the borders, they enlisted the help of the trade community and the direct involvement of the businesses that are responsible for bringing that cargo into the U.S. They had more than 1,000 members in their first year, and after 20 years of substantial advancement, worldwide security efforts have ramped up dramatically. And there are a significant number of security programs globally that play into this supply chain security, this international supply chain security mentality, including the establishment of the WCO, World Customs Organization, SAFE Framework of Standards, SAFE. That program establishes the criteria to become an authorized economic operator, an AEO program. And AEO programs have a component for both trade compliance and supply chain security. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But in 2021, the US CTPAT program overhauled its minimum security criteria, made them a little bit more presentable and understandable, and also included some of the new developments that it hadn't fully incorporated previously. We're now in 2023, we're operating under the enhanced MSC. They've been established, they've been conducting validations under these newest MSC for a couple of years now, so they should become fairly standard and recognizable to most program participants. And then last year, CTPAT expanded the focus of what CTPAT was and includes now both supply chain security and trade compliance, making CTPAT a full authorized economic operator program under that WCO SAFE framework. And as a full authorized economic operator AEO program, that means that we have a twin focus within CTPAT, one on trade compliance and one on supply chain security. Today's conversation is all about supply chain security. We've already done a webinar on CTPAT trade compliance earlier this year, and there's links to that later on in the webinar, so you can go watch that if you are focused on that angle. But as a quick rundown, trade compliance, the CTPAT trade compliance program is available only to U.S. importers and Canadian non-resident importers, NRIs. It requires a comprehensive internal control and audit trail for your trade compliance activities, and its focus is on compliance, not security. Meanwhile, the CTPAT Supply Chain Security Program keeps the same focus that it's always had since 2001 when it was first developed. And it's open to importers, exporters, foreign manufacturers, transportation and service provider companies. So it's a broader scope, again, looking at that entire supply chain. And they have the minimum security criteria, the MSC, that are the underpinning of what drives that CTPAT Supply Chain Security Program. And the focus of CTPAT Supply Chain Security is security and risk, not compliance. These two programs exist side by side to make CTPAT itself an AEO program. But you can join CTPAT Supply Chain Security without participating in CTPAT Trade Compliance. CTPAT Trade Compliance requires CTPAT Supply Chain Security as a prerequisite, so you must be in the security program first and foremost. There's some benefits kind of included here, but just recognizing that CTPAT, the term CTPAT, is now an umbrella term, and it includes both trade compliance and supply chain security. And our focus today is on that supply chain security piece of the equation. What is the driving force behind CTPAT supply chain security? And the focus, the original ethos and mentality that Customs wanted was to achieve security through cooperation, using the four-pronged approach of prevention, shared responsibility, security awareness, and efficiency. The cooperation between Customs and the trade community is essential to the actual success of bringing additional security to the supply chain. I don't think any rational person would say that by being in CTPAT, you are fully preventing or eliminating all risk. And that's not what it's about. It's not driving the risk factor down to zero. It's about making sure that people have the necessary awareness to recognize problems and hopefully have a chance to prevent them before they become catastrophic. In security, the definition of security has evolved over the last 20 years. 20 plus years. Again, the focus initially was on weapons of mass destruction, nuclear threats, biological threats, things like that. But it does also include things like risks to bringing in illicit substances. The forced labor risks are now part of the equation, and several other different factors that influence what security can mean in your supply chain. So it's not just about terrorism, it's about preventing bad actors from being able to do things that we do not like to have them do. Also with CTPAT, they're bringing an element of efficiency into the equation because there's just not enough human beings physically at the border to examine all 33 plus million containers. So it requires the support of the entire supply chain to get to that reduced risk profile. Today, the member types of CTPAT are loosely divided into this trifecta breakdown. This is my breakdown, this isn't theirs, but it helps me understand kind of what the universe is. I think whether you're first applying to CTPAT or else you're trying to maintain your membership, it's important to recognize where you fit into the program. This will help you understand what your requirements are and what role you play, what role customs plays, what role the other service providers or other partners in the supply chain play in the overall international supply chain. Not every business type is eligible for CTPAT, and certainly not every eligible business is ready to participate in the program. But understanding those requirements is really the first step in that journey and understanding what those member types are. Loosely, they're broken down into industry types, which includes the importers, exporters, and foreign manufacturers. Importers by far being the largest participating member type of the CTPAT program. And really, the CTPAT program was initially designed for importers exclusively until Customs realized that they needed the participation of the entire supply chain, and they created criteria and eligibility standards for the other business types that are out here. But importers, exporters, foreign manufacturers located in Canada and Mexico also have the opportunity to join CTPAT directly. Since this was created, Canada and Mexico have each developed their own AEO programs, which include that supply chain security component. The likelihood of foreign manufacturers joining CTPAT is lower than it used to be. Also included in here are the transportation companies, highway, sea, rail, and air carriers, as well as Mexican long-haul carriers that are crossing the border. And then lastly, there are service companies representing about 16% of the members. And here we've got our customs brokers, people like me. Star USA is in CTPAT. We are a CTPAT certified customs broker. And your brokers can join the program. And it's basically a bit of a guarantee, or at least an assurance, that your service providers are also taking the steps necessary to help keep the supply chain secure. Customs brokers, consolidators that are physically handling the goods that have their own assets, 3PLs also that have their own assets that physically take possession of goods, as well as marine port authorities and terminal operators. When you're creating the map of what your international supply chain looks like, knowing if you're working with a partner who is in the program should be a factor in influencing whether or not you're going to retain them as a service provider, helping them understand the important role that they play in your membership, in the global supply chain just risk profile that exists, helps enhance and increase the likelihood of reducing that security risk component. Additionally, CTPAT has mutual recognition arrangements, MRAs, with a variety of different countries. Mutual recognition programs basically create a shared standard between two countries' customs agencies. So our CBP and another country's customs agencies, shared understanding of what minimum security standards exist and whether they rise to a shared criteria. So CBP will recognize this list of countries, their supply chain security programs, as valid and up to the CTPAT standards. In order to get mutual recognition, the country has to have a fully operational program in place at the federal level. It can't be a local or industry level program. There are a lot of industry level programs that don't qualify for mutual recognition. It has to be at the federal level. They also have to have a strong validation process. It's the trust but verify component of supply chain security mentality. Great that you say that you have these things in place, but you need to also show it. There has to be a strong security program, security component within that program to ensure that the security standards are up to snuff. It can't be just a trade compliance focused program. And they also have to have a customs mutual assistance agreement already established with the US. So in order for them to be an MRA, those standards have to be met. In the last 2 years, CBP has added Uruguay, Brazil, Guatemala, and Colombia as mutual recognition arrangements. And effectively, in practice, this means that you can anticipate that your business partners in these countries will have security standards in place and applied to the cargo that you're exporting, which means that they're going to have requirements of you in order to receive cargo that you export to them. And additionally, you can expect that participating companies in these countries that participate in these AEO or supply chain security programs, that they will have certain security practices in place at the point of origin, which is a very strong assurance that your cargo is going to be secure while it's in transit. You can also expect to see streamlined trading practices between the US and these countries. As they ramp up security efforts, the US can focus and prioritize its efforts at riskier cargoes. If you want to find out more, feel free to click through to that mutual recognition link there at the bottom right. What are some of the benefits of the CTPAT supply chain security program? CBP offers the list on the left as its selling points, its encouragement for you to join the CTPAT program. Remember, the government wants you to join this, and this is a partnership. They look at you to be enforcing practices on your supply chain, on your own business, to ensure that security standards are met. And in exchange, they're going to give you the benefit list on the left. We'll hit that real quick first. But they're talking about reduced number of CBP examinations, front of the line inspections and shorter border wait times, possible exemption from stratified exams, assignment of supply chain security specialist, access to the free and secure trade lane. You get access to the CTPAT web portal system, which is going to be undergoing some revisions here shortly. They were supposed to be already done with that, but they had to push it back. Mutual recognition is part of the equation. It's also, CTPAT supply chain security is also a prerequisite for other pilot programs and US government partner programs. It's also a prerequisite for the CTPAT trade compliance program, which used to be ISA, as well as business resumption, priority following a natural disaster or terrorist attack. If they have to close a port, for example, and they need to work through a backlog of cargo, CTPAT members are expected to be moved to the front of the line. Priority consideration at industry CBP's Centers of Excellence and Expertise, the CEEs, or Cs as they call them. Basically, CTPAT members are providing more information to CBP, which will help the Cs tackle your problems quicker. Those are the program benefits that CBP offers to the industry. In my experience, what I've seen the actual benefits that companies are attracted to and what actually manifests are the list on the right, the additional benefits that I've got documented here. We see companies that their benefit from CTPAT is in the line of things like brand protection, knowing and being a member of a voluntary program that increases supply chain security practices and makes sure that your cargo is less likely to have contraband smuggled in or, God forbid, be one of the containers where a weapon of mass destruction is smuggled in, is a huge factor that companies get to advertise on. Hey, look at us. We are a secure company. We care about security. We care about these things. We care about protecting people. We don't use forced labor in our supply chain, and we've verified it. That's a huge, tremendous, non-monetary, but definitely significant factor that businesses look at when considering whether the CTPAT is right for them. And they get that brand protection built into joining the program. They will also get competitive advantage. As we saw in that previous slide, those mutual recognition arrangements are continuing to grow and expand. And as the world increases its focus on security, your company being a member of a supply chain security program in the US is going to give you a certain advantage when trying to access foreign markets. It's also going to allow you to make smarter decisions when buying from foreign markets. When you're considering whether to source from a country who has an MRA versus a country who doesn't, do you want to have the risk of lower security when their country doesn't have an MRA, or do you want that extra assurance when you're buying from those countries? You get a bit of a competitive advantage there by ensuring that your supply chain has the security in place that other countries and other companies are looking for, and that you're buying from securer countries and securer businesses. It also helps you implement supply chain effectiveness. And this is the real one for me in the world that I live in. Effective supply chains, as we've just seen through the pandemic, are a make or break element of any international business. If you don't have an effective supply chain, if your supply chain is substantially disrupted, or you don't have the protocols in place or the procedures in place to navigate through challenges, or you don't have an aware set of folks that are handling this cargo, you're more likely to have significant disruptions in your supply chain. If your supply chain breaks down, you can't do business. And what CTPAT helps you do, one of the benefits of the program that really manifests, is it forces you to develop the policies and procedures and practices and protocols and work instructions and communication networks and those channels that help you navigate through disruptions to the supply chain. From little things like the cargo got lost along the way. Okay, we've got our tracing in place. Let's figure out where it went lost and figure out what happened to it. To bigger disruptions like port strikes and natural disasters, the Suez Canal getting blocked for days on end by a cargo ship that's stuck. It helps you understand and pinpoint where problems are and fix those things. And that's, I can't overstate how important an effective supply chain is. You can't really put a clear price tag on what that supply chain effectiveness is worth to businesses in general, but you can certainly look at it from your business's perspective and say, okay, if my supply chain is severely disrupted, what happens? What does that mean to my business? You also get a cross benefit with other internal strategic initiatives. And this is one that I see people often overlook a lot. It depends on your business type, how important this is to you. But when you've got supply chain security working together with your corporate social responsibility teams, which is your forced labor prevention, which is your other environmental things, got them working together with your loss prevention and your risk mitigation teams, that combined effort, incorporating supply chain security into that equation, allows you to provide a very robust and actually much more secure supply chain just through getting these individuals that are working in these other departments on these other teams working together. That strategic benefit can be very, very important and impactful. You get that confidence that you have a secure supply chain, or at least a more secure supply chain. Again, there's no such thing as entirely secure, but there is a certain level of assurance and reasonable expectation that you can gain with doing the things that CTPAT asks of you versus not doing them. One of the important things to state is that there is no regulatory basis for CTPAT. That partnership word is coming into play here. Because there's no regulatory basis, that means that there's no penalty. It's not written into law that you must be a CTPAT program member. It's not written that there's any risk of noncompliance. In fact, if you're in the program, your most significant risk of noncompliance is being removed from the program. So you're not taking on significant additional risk by joining CTPAT, and you're eliminating potentially substantial risk in your supply chain by participating. That's for supply chain security, CTPAT supply chain security. For CTPAT trade compliance, there is a regulatory basis for it if you're joining that program, again, separately from supply chain security. If you're joining that CTPAT trade compliance program, there are going to be regulatory obligations once you've joined that program. It's important to recognize kind of what risks you're taking on and which ones you're giving up by being in the program. Every member type of the dozen member types that are available, each one of those business types has an eligibility requirement that must be met. On the left-hand side of this slide are the importers' eligibility requirements. They're fairly standard and straightforward. If you're importing cargo, you're almost certainly going to be eligible, so there's not a whole lot to consider here. Each business type has its own eligibility requirements. If you are not an importer and you're curious about the requirements, click through that link when you get the slides, and you'll be able to see what's going on for your company. Once you start evaluating, or once you've kind of determined that you are eligible for the program, you would look at the minimum security criteria, the MSC. And the MSC are the standards that CTPAT supply chain security requires of all program participants. The exact expression is going to change by your business type. Customs brokers don't have quite the same standards for things like handling cargo, because typically customs brokers don't handle cargo. Those are the freight forwarders. Granted, your customs broker may also be your freight forwarder. You can have both of those hats on at once, but basically the CTPAT program has different standards depending on your business type, and you need to recognize what those standards are for the business type that you are in the program as. Again, most companies are focusing on the importer side, but the minimum security criteria are broken down into 3 focus areas with 12 categories, 4 categories per focus area. The three focus areas are corporate security, transportation security, and then people and physical security. And we'll take a look at the 12 categories here in a little bit more detail. If you're not sure if CTPAT is a good program for you, you should really talk to somebody that can help you understand the pros and cons and drawbacks. It's not a difficult program to participate in, but it can be a bit of a heavy carry. So understanding what you're getting yourself into is one of the requirements, one of the first things that you should evaluate. Look at your eligibility requirements, analyze the minimum security criteria, and think about them in the context of your business, how you can achieve those sorts of things. And that will help you identify if CTPAT is going to be advantageous for your business. A lot of times you won't have the option. Your customers are going to demand that you are a member in CTPAT. And if your customers are demanding it, then your choice is either join the program or give up the business. And for most companies in the US, giving up the business is not one of the options on the table. So you need to implement those controls. Taking a look at the MSC, the minimum security criteria for the corporate criteria section, these 4 sections, we're looking at security, vision, and responsibility, risk assessment, business partners, and cybersecurity. The cybersecurity component of the MSC was beefed up for the 2021 revamp that they did. So we're a little bit in the business partners and certainly in the security, vision, responsibility sectors. The risk assessment piece didn't change dramatically, but effectively, you need to have a corporate stance on all of these areas. In the MSC, they will spell out all of the different pieces. I can't break it down here. It's a couple hundred different line items for you to examine. But from the corporate criteria perspective, they need you to have a systematized approach to addressing these things. And when you look at the minimum security criteria individually, they are divided into 2 categories. You must or you should. We'll take a look at an example of one of those in a moment, but they use that must and should framework in order to tell you the things that are essential to be a member of the program and the things that are recommended, but can vary based on your business type. And all of their feedback, all of Customs feedback, all of Customs interaction with their members is going to be tied around that must and should framework. So understanding how that language works is important to succeeding at the program. So these are your corporate criteria. I'm not going to read through all the words here. I create these slides so that you can use them as a reference point for yourself in the future. So when you get a download, you can refer back to these and actually get most of the context just from the slides themselves. The second category for the MSC is transportation security, and that covers conveyance and IIT security. IIT is Instruments of International Traffic, IIT. These are your containers, these are your secured boxes and various other things that help move the cargo. Seal security is an essential component, making sure that the cargo is properly secured. Procedural security, making sure they got the right processes in place. And lastly, agricultural security, which was also beefed up in the 2021 MSC updates. There are additional agricultural security steps that a lot of importers already take as part of their normal course of business, but they were incorporated into CTPAT as a criteria. So now, CTPAT members must specifically address those agricultural components that may not have been addressed in documentation or in practice necessarily, but were generally being done. Those of you that live in certain regions of the world where there are invasive species or pests or plants that have wreaked havoc on the environment, you'll understand why agricultural security is a key component. Protecting the environment is priority, should be a priority for all businesses worldwide. The last category of the MSC are people and physical security. And these deal with the empowerment that you give to your teams internally, to your supply chain partners. Do they have the necessary controls in place to effectively restrict access to certain areas of the organization, to cargo, to where you store your cargo? Are they informed of what their standards are? Are they made aware of what is going on and what the risks are to your supply chain? Are you taking those steps necessary to ensure that your human beings, your physical facilities are prepared to resist unlawful intrusions and things like that? These are the 4 categories: physical security, physical access controls, personnel security, as well as education and awareness. One of the key things that is part of the new minimum security criteria are the forced labor standards. started an overview on forced labor last December. There's a link here in these slides that you can go watch that webinar. But forced labor is an escalating concern globally. A major loophole was closed in US regulations last year, and the enforcement to prevent the use of forced labor in the production of goods that are imported into the US has ramped up. There's a much higher degree of enforcement on these forced labor protections. Additionally, the CTPAT requirement for forced labor programs was changed from a should to a must. In 2021, it was rolled out as a should, but in January of 2023, it was changed to a must. So now the language in the minimum security criteria for this particular item is that CTPAT members must have a documented social compliance program in place that, at a minimum, addresses how the company ensures goods imported into the United States were not mined, produced, or manufactured wholly or in part with prohibited forms of labor, for example, forced, imprisoned, indentured, or indentured child labor. That language is how they frame these musts and shoulds, and they don't give you a how you do these things. They tell you what you need to do, and it's up to your business to understand how to implement that requirement. Forced labor controls are ramping up globally. You can expect to see headway on the EU front, enhanced forced labor protections to prevent cargo from coming into the EU, as well as removal from the shelves of EU stores if any of the goods are found to have been manufactured with forced labor and discovered after the import. They will pull them from the shelves, is what I understand the new rules will be focusing on. I don't think those have taken effect yet. Key takeaways from this segment: supply chain security is a permanent element of international business. There's no expectation that I have in my head that supply chain security is ever going to be less important tomorrow than it is today. It will only become increasingly more important. CTPAT, we've seen take a firmer hand with member companies over the last 2 years as the new MSC have rolled out. They are ramping up their enforcement of the musts in particular. And they're being more particular when talking about the shoulds. They will ask for more details than they used to. That being said, compliance with CTPAT program requirements has never been easier. We have more tools available to us as businesses to achieve these things. Businesses, by and large, recognize the importance of security in the supply chain. So it's a much lower barrier to overcome. It's important to recognize that security requires active participation and involvement from the entire supply chain, both foreign and domestic. It's not just the trade compliance person is sitting at their desk and is trying to bring about security to the supply chain. One person is not enough. Security is now going to be a baseline expectation in global trade, as fundamental to the equation as competitive pricing. If you don't have security or you don't have competitive pricing, you're probably not getting the business. Companies looking to expand and succeed in the global market are going to need to be prepared to adapt to these requirements. And knowing how you're going to do that, recognizing how it fits into your organization, is an essential tool to growing internationally. Next section here, we're going to be talking about the program and implementation, looking at how the CTPAT security or supply chain security factors into your organization, what you can expect, tools, tips, tricks to get you from A to B. Sorry about that. The risk assessment process, the certification process, the risk assessment process, recognizing supply chain partners, and talking through CTPAT Tier 3 best practices. This information should be useful to those of you that are members, as well as those of you that are considering membership out there. But taking a look at the certification process, it can be intimidating. I'm hoping this overview here will give you some recognition of what's all involved. It's not the cradle to grave, every detail, but it's a simplified checklist that you can use to kind of frame this either in your mind or in the mind of your manager or whoever else that you're talking to about CTPAT. CTPAT does tend to be one of the more challenging programs to implement, precisely because it forces people from different departments and different teams to work together. It forces you to work with your supply chain partners in ways that you might prefer not to, because talking to people is hard. And I get it. Working with your other departments, like your logistics team or your supply chain team or your purchasing team or your IT teams, working with them on an initiative like supply chain security, where they don't have really a direct investment in it, other than the business is invested, but IT doesn't care that much. But there are cybersecurity requirements, and your IT teams need to be aware of what those requirements are, and they're going to have to take some steps, usually in the way of either enhancing intrusion protection or documenting certain practices that are already in place. And working with people can be a pain in the butt, and I get it, and I'm sorry for it, but that's what this program is about. In the commitment phase, you're going to look at your eligibility requirements, review the MSC that apply to your business type, establish that cross-departmental commitment, work with the heads of finance, IT, your executive teams, your purchasing teams, your legal teams, whoever it is, get their buy-in, and then create a team that can identify the requirements and the internal action plans, and then execute on those plans. Once you've got your team made and you're beginning to execute on the plans, you're entering into the certification phase. And in that certification phase, you want to conduct and document a global risk assessment. We'll talk about that in the next slide, but you want to look at your entire supply chain and evaluate that supply chain against the standards that CTPAT requires, as well as any other standards that you want to apply from your business's perspective. Once you've got your global risk assessment established and understood, and you've taken the corrective actions or whatever you need to do, you apply to the CTPAT program. Inside that application process, you will complete your supply chain security profile, basically responding to each of the MSC for your business through your own language and providing documentation to customs that adheres to that. All of this is done within the CTPAT web portal. You don't actually talk to a customs agent until after your application is submitted. And by talk to, usually I mean an email. Once you submit your supply chain security profile, your designated SCSS, Supply Chain Security Specialist from CBP, will contact you with any requirements or recommendations or questions that they have about your profile. After that point, you will be, assuming that the SCSS accepts your application, you will be in the program as a CTPAT Tier 1 member, meaning certified. You have been certified in the program, but you don't rise to Tier 2, which is validated until you undergo this next phase, the validation phase. Within 1 year of your certification, so you've gotten your Tier 1 status, from 1 year from that date, within 1 year from that date, Supply Chain Security Specialist is going to conduct a validation. So basically, you told them a bunch of information online through that security profile. Now they're coming out to verify that you're doing the things that you said you're doing. And they will either conduct those validations in person or virtually. They will choose either a domestic facility or a foreign facility or both in that process, depending on your business type, depending on what your cargo is, depending on what your volumes are. They'll make that determination, they'll notify you, and they'll give you an opportunity to work with them on coordinating that validation process. The location selection is going to be determined by data that Customs has access to. So if you're not already in ACE, the automated commercial environment, I recommend getting an ACE account set up particularly for your import side, so you can evaluate who CBP sees as your most significant partners. After the validation, the SCSS will give you a report giving you requirements and recommendations. You'll address all of those, and assuming it's successful, you will be a CTPAT Tier 2. Rough timeline is your commitment, that phase can take between 60 days to 1 year, depending on your business complexity, the things that you already have in place, how well coordinated you already are. That commitment phase, expect between 60 days and 1 year. The certification phase takes 30 to 120 days to complete the submission, and about 60 days for Customs to respond. I think they're down to 30 days now. They were running high during the pandemic, but their responses have gotten a bit progressively more quick since things have eased up. And then your validation comes within 1 year of certification, and again, allow for about 90 days for response. We've been seeing those come through quicker. 35 to 45 days is an average that I feel like is accurate, but they'll provide that report within, let's say, 45 to 90 days of your validation. After you've gone through that validation and you're in Tier 2, then you need to maintain your annual ASP, your annual security profile. It's a little bit redundant on the A there, but your annual security profile within the web portal, you update whatever's gone on with your business, new changes to your business structure or to your supply chain security practices. You need to kind of inform Customs of that, and they'll evaluate your profile every year and give you any recommendations that they have. Otherwise, you maintain your commitments, and then every 4 years, you get a revalidation. They'll pick either another business partner or another facility domestically that they will visit. That's kind of the shape of what CTPAT involves in practice. There's a lot of nuance to each of these layers, but in a nutshell, that's what the certification process looks like. One of the most important pieces of your program participation is your global risk assessment. CTPAT CBP publishes a 5-step risk assessment guide. Their 5 steps involve mapping the cargo flow, assessing the threat in your supply chain, and the vulnerability inherent in your supply chain. Threat increases depending on the value of the cargo or the frequency, or the areas that you're trading through. And your vulnerabilities can be affected by the degree of risk mitigation factors that you have in place. Do you have armed guards standing outside of every container as it moves throughout the entire supply chain? Do you have RFID tracking devices in all your containers? Those sorts of things. They also want to see what your action plan has been to address any of your threats or vulnerabilities, and the audit plan corresponding to what actions, what steps you took to mitigate those risks. The global risk assessment is probably the most essential component, and it gets overlooked quite frequently, where companies don't understand how significant knowing what your supply chain is, just mapping it and identifying all the components of it, how essential that is to actually having an effective program. People like to get stuck in making sure that certain documents look good when they're provided from the supplier to the broker or things like that. But you've really got to identify who the players are in your global supply chain. That's one of the most essential steps. And then you need to understand what kind of risk they present to your organization. STAR does a global risk assessment, has a tool for that. And we've been given best practice recommendations by CTPAT supply chain security specialists, where our clients have gotten that best practice recognition. I'll talk about best practice in a second. You guys don't know what that is yet, but we'll cover it. Importantly, in CTPAT, you need to work with your supply chain partners. Sometimes that's difficult. One of the most challenging pieces is addressing the assessments or conducting an assessment on all of your supply chain partners. This includes your transportation providers, your customs brokers, your foreign manufacturers, all of the partners that are involved in that global supply chain. If they're already in CTPAT or an AEO program, the assessment process can be very streamlined, but you need to identify all of the partners and then get them to communicate with you about their security practices. It's an essential component, and if you don't have a solution already in place for it, there are companies like mine that have solutions that we can provide for conducting assessments. You definitely need to be able to provide evidence and supporting documentation to your supply chain security specialist during the annual security profiles, and you need to have all of your supply chain considered here. Make sure that your contract language, both foreign and domestic, refers to baseline security requirements. Make sure that you're contractually notifying your business partners of what your expectations of them are. And you can lean on that if you have, for example, somebody not responding to the assessments either timely or if they're misrepresenting facts on those assessments. Your contracts are going to be your way of enforcing the expectations with those partners. So if your partner told you that they were sealing every container and you come to find out that they weren't sealing it, your contract language may allow you to penalize them for that transgression. If you don't have it in your contracts, you're not going to have a lot of leverage, and then you're going to be kind of stuck with trying to figure out what to do next. So make sure that your contracts are in line with your organization's security standards and expectations. And make sure that you have all of the essential security practices in place. First and foremost, that's high security seals. Making sure that you're using the PAS ISO 17712, whatever the current standard is, on your cargo containers. Make sure that you're conducting your container inspections and documenting what that inspection covered, who did it, what date, what findings they had, if any, and what actions were taken if there was a finding. It's not that uncommon for containers to have damage to them. Just document it and make sure that you've done the due diligence there. Make sure that you have robust procedures in place and prepare yourself for customs visitations and conduct visitations on your supply chain partners as well. When customs does their validation and they pick a foreign supplier, work with that supplier to make sure that they have all the stuff in place that they said they had. Make sure that you've been there first and that you've teed them up to understand what the environment's going to be like. We had a client, unfortunately, who didn't notify their foreign supplier effectively, or their foreign supplier didn't understand that customs was coming to visit, and there was nobody there to greet them or walk them through when customs showed up. And that was a huge problem for that business's supply chain security and CTPAT membership, because when customs showed up, they couldn't get their questions answered. And if customs can't get their questions answered, then you're certainly not living up to the obligations of the program. So you have to have those conversations and have those standards in place with all of your supply chain partners. Those of you interested in Tier 3, what Tier 3 is in the CTPAT universe, I think I mentioned it already, but Tier 1 is certified, meaning customs has accepted your application with no issues and you're awaiting validation. Tier 2 is validated. Customs has come out, conducted a validation visit, gone through their criteria, you've resolved any discrepancies or questions that they had following that visit, and then you're validated and now you're in tier 2. Some companies that are interested in achieving the highest standard, of which there are not that many companies. I believe the number was under 200 out of the 10,900. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's a highly restricted environment. But the CTPAT publishes a CTPAT best practices framework that focuses on senior management support, evidence of implementation, innovative business process and technology used for supply chain security purposes, documented processes, as well as a robust system of checks and balances and accountability to ensure that people are doing what they are expected to be doing. At minimum, you must meet all the minimum security criteria. You must complete your validation with no required actions. Recommendations are fine. Required actions indicate that there was a significant enough discrepancy that you had to have remedial corrections put in place. And you must demonstrate at least one best practice. So companies that are interested in being recognized as tier 3, again, a great marketing tool and certainly a good peace of mind for any business that is expanding that way. That's kind of the major content of the session. I'm going to run through a couple more slides. Feel free to submit your questions in the question and answer piece of the software here. If you do need help with CTPAT, if these slides don't get you across the finish line, they're not designed to get you across the finish line. They're designed to help you understand what your obligation is, what you're stepping into. If you need help, our team, my secure little trade team, are very effective, very experienced at dealing with the CTPAT requirements. Recognize that CTPAT is not a one-size-fits-all program, that you need to work with one another internally within your organization, as well as externally with your supply chain partners, in order to achieve a solution to supply chain security that works for your business. And that solution needs to rise to the standard of CTPAT minimum security criteria. So bringing all that stuff together can be a challenge. And in trade compliance and in supply chain security in general, the word of the day is understaffed. There's only so many resources. So if you need help, feel free to reach out to us. We know what we're doing. If you need more training or information, we have a webinar from April of this year on CTPAT trade compliance, going over the other side of the CTPAT equation, the other piece of the AEO program that CTPAT now is, and helps you understand what that trade compliance standard looks like and what's going on there. And then in December of last year, we had a discussion on forced labor that you can watch back the webinar there. You can either wait for the slides to come out with these links will work in those slides that you get, or you can go to our YouTube page or our website, either one now, and find both of these trainings with their resources there. But I recommend these if you are trying to understand or navigate either of these angles separately from supply chain security. Some links and resources at the top are the CBP resources that they publish that are going to help you on your journey of CTPAT. I wish I could have told you guys more about the new web portal changes that they're making, but I don't know exactly what they are. We'll just see what shapes up for next year. And then Start USA, our job aids, and some minimum security and eligibility requirements on our website. You can refer to those to help yourself out. And lastly, the completion code for NCBFAA is there on the screen in the bottom left, star 61367. Feel free to use that for your NCBFAA credits. Thank you all for your time today. It's been wonderful. CTPAT is a really interesting program. Hopefully you understand more about how this works in the real world.